Have you ever considered that the people who betrayed you might have handed you the greatest psychological weapon you'll ever possess? It sounds strange, but Carl Jung once said something deeply revealing: everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. In other words, your enemies. They might not just be enemies. They might be your accidental teachers, if you're awake enough to see it. When someone betrays you, they don't just reveal their own shadow, their fear, insecurity, or shame. They also activate yours. They press on old wounds you may have avoided, drag buried pain to the surface. And in that moment, if you choose to pause, to look inward instead of retaliating, you awaken what Jung called the most powerful psychological weapon: awareness of your own shadow. Think about it: if you were never betrayed, would you have learned how to stand on your own? If you weren't disliked, would you ever have asked, "Who am I when I stop pleasing everyone else?" You didn't choose the pain. But you can choose how you respond to it. And that response, that quiet strength, that inner clarity, is what makes you unshakable. Let's talk about something Jung called the shadow. Not the kind that follows you in sunlight, but the one that lives in your mind, the hidden parts of yourself that you've rejected, denied, or buried because they didn't fit the image you thought you had to become. Everyone carries this shadow. Every single one of us. And when someone betrays you, it's easy to think, they hurt me. But what's really happening goes deeper. They're not just reacting to you. They're projecting their own shadow, their unresolved fears, shame, and insecurities, onto you. You've become the screen onto which they cast what they refuse to face in themselves. And here's the paradox: that moment of betrayal, it also reveals your shadow. Those deep emotional wounds you haven't faced, fear of abandonment, not being good enough, needing validation, they rise up. But that's not the end. That's the doorway. That's where the healing begins. Carl Jung once said, everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. When someone betrays you, instead of asking, "Why did they do this to me?" try asking, "What part of me is being mirrored back right now?" Because often, pain is not a punishment. It's a path. The people who hurt you, they're often the ones who can't accept themselves. So, what do? They make you carry their unhealed pain. Their shame. Their fear. They don't know how to sit with their own brokenness, so they project it onto you. But here's where the shift happens. Instead of retaliating, you pause. You go inward. And that is where your true power is born. Carl Jung said, "Who looks outside dreams. Who looks inside awakens." When you begin to look within, into your own shadow, into your own patterns, you begin to awaken. And the deeper you go, the less reactive you become. You're no longer at the mercy of other people's chaos. You stop matching their noise with more noise. You stop feeding the conflict. You become still. Quiet. Present. And here's the twist: that silence. That calm, centered presence. It terrifies them. Because silence is not weakness. It's self-possession. And when your energy is no longer available for their drama, they lose control. So the next time someone hurts you, remember this. It's not about them. It's about what's being revealed in you. Because that wound they opened might just be the place where your true self begins. Have you ever noticed that the moment you stopped fighting your pain, was the moment you became your strongest? Carl Jung once said, "What you resist, persists. What you accept, transforms." And here's the thing, most people are still at war. Not with others, but with the shadows inside their own minds. They're exhausted. They're overwhelmed. And they don't understand why, no matter how hard they try to control their lives, they still feel empty. But you, the one who's chosen to heal, you're beginning to realize something powerful: you don't have to conquer the darkness. You just have to face it, and walk through. And when you do that, when you begin to align with your pain, when you start living in harmony with your deeper purpose, you become dangerous. Not because you threaten others, but because you can no longer be controlled by fear, guilt, or old expectations. Your very presence begins to reflect back the truth others are avoiding. Jung said, "The cave you fear to enter holds the treasure you seek." Every tear you've shed in silence. Every sleepless night when you questioned your worth. It wasn't punishment. It was initiation. A sacred psychological transformation, not into someone else, but into your true self. And then something strange happens. You stop reacting the way you used to. You don't over-explain. You don't beg to be seen. You simply evolve. Carl Jung called this the psychological chemical reaction. When two personalities meet, if there's truth, both are transformed. But in your case, only you changed. And that change makes you unrecognizable to those who once hurt you. They were familiar with the old version of you, the one who was easy to hurt, easy to control, easy to manipulate. But the person you've become, that's someone they never imagined you could be. What if I told you that the moment you chose to think, truly think, instead of react, you stepped out of the system that once controlled you? Carl Jung once said, "Thinking is difficult. That's why most people judge." And if you've ever been misunderstood for choosing reflection over retaliation, you're not weak, you're awakened. In a world where everyone rushes to shout, to blame, to react, you paused. You chose the harder path. You chose to witness instead of war. And that choice, that's what makes you unshakable. You see, most people live inside a psychological loop. They hurt, they lash out, they justify, they repeat. But when you chose to reflect instead of retaliate, you broke that loop. You became unpredictable. You became free. And freedom? That's terrifying to those still living in chains. Now let's talk about success, your quiet revenge. Not the kind that screams, "I told you so." But the kind that rises without explanation. The kind that doesn't burn bridges, but builds entire cities beyond them. Jung said, "I am not what happened to me. I am what I choose to become." And that's exactly what you've done. You didn't let the betrayal define you. You didn't let the pain decide your future. You chose growth. You chose truth. You chose to become someone they could never anticipate. They expected you to collapse. But you became a version of yourself they've never met, and never will. Think about it this way, they wrote the prologue. But you're the author of the story. They were chapter 1, the wound, the betrayal, the silence. But now, you're already on chapter 17. And what you've created is no longer a reaction. It's a resurrection. You didn't just survive what they did to you. You transformed because of it. That's what Jung called individuation, the sacred process of becoming who you were always meant to be. Not despite the pain, but through it. And that's not just healing. That's mastery. You are no longer the person they tried to destroy. You are the light forged from the very darkness they created. And that's what they fear most, not your anger, but your clarity. Not your rage, but your resurrection. Because once you become whole, you can no longer be used as a mirror for someone else's brokenness. So if you're still wondering whether your path is right, ask yourself this. Are you becoming more of who you truly are? Are you walking away from the noise, not with bitterness, but with peace? Are you growing so silently that even your absence is louder than their presence? Then you've already won. Let this be your reminder, your pain was not a punishment. Your silence was not weakness. It was a portal. And now that you've stepped through it, there's no going back. Because you are not what happened to you. You are who you chose to become. And that choice, that inner shift, is the most powerful transformation they never saw coming. Let's pause here. Look back, not to dwell, but to see clearly. Every betrayal you endured. It wasn't just a wound. It was a turning point. A message written in pain that read, "You're being called into something greater." You see, Carl Jung didn't define individuation as simply healing. He saw it as becoming, a sacred process of peeling away every false identity the world forced onto you, until all that remains is truth. Your truth. And perhaps, what you've been through wasn't designed to break you, but to break the illusion of who you thought you had to be. The people who hurt you, they never meant to build a legend. But they did. In trying to control you, diminish you, or silence you, they handed you the raw material of transformation. Without knowing it, they became the architects of your awakening. That's why you're not who you used to be. You are not the wound. You are the wisdom. Not the exile, but the evolution. You have become the living proof that pain is not the end of the story, it's the beginning of authorship. Jung called this individuation, the moment you stop trying to be accepted, and start becoming who your soul remembers you truly are. So if this message echoed somewhere deep within you, maybe it's time. Time to stop carrying the version of you they once hurt. Time to step into the legend they never expected you to become. And if you're ready to walk that path, with clarity, courage, and conscious healing, make sure to subscribe and share this video with someone else who's ready to remember who they really are. Because legends aren't born. They're forged. And you, my friend, you're just getting started.